Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's extreme drought. Today, Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall announced stage 2 of the water shortage contingency emergency for the city, which limits government use of water. We haven't seen this level of restrictions since 2004, so this drought is a big deal in the city. Up first in our conversation is Merrill, hydrologist for the National Weather Service in Salt Lake City. Glenn, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you for having me today.
Glenn, today the National Weather Service released its latest drought numbers. Can you help us break down what they say and what we can expect for the summer?
Yeah, so actually it's a much bigger than just the National Weather Service. It's a collaborative, multi-agency process to come up with the drought maps that we're going to be looking at today. It starts at the national level and works down to the local level. So what we're going to be seeing with the drought map is quite grim, actually, and it's actually trended a little worse over the last 2 weeks. What we're looking at here is that 100% of the state is currently in some level of drought.
So much red.
Yeah, and the red is what we really need to focus on. The red, the brighter red, that's showing that 90% of the state is covered in extreme drought conditions at this time. If we get into the dark red there, that's showing exceptional drought. That is the worst category for drought conditions, and 62% of the state is in exceptional drought conditions currently, and that's actually expanded by about 4% over the last 2 weeks. So the big picture takeaway, the whole state's in drought, and 90% are at the two worst categories in extreme or exceptional.
We also have a 3-month graphic. If we can just pull this up really quick and maybe have you help elaborate this on us. What can you tell us about what we're seeing here?
So what we're looking at here is a 3-month outlook for precipitation, focused on the state of Utah there in the center. And where you're looking at kind of those warmer colors, the tans and getting into the oranges, that's signifying that the table's tipped for drier than normal conditions for the June, July, and August period. Where you don't see any colors across southwestern Utah, that's equal chances that we could see, average conditions, above average conditions, or below average conditions. So there's really no strong signal, and that's indicative of, as we get into July and August, the encroachment of what we typically see during the monsoon season, where we get thunderstorms moving up from south.
So much easier to understand this concept when you can kind of see it visually here. So thank you for breaking this down for us. Glenn, when did you start realizing that our state was going to experience exceptional drought this year, and what factors have you been looking at to make those determinations? Well,
we actually started the year in exceptional drought for many areas in the state. If we look back to 2020, really, as we trended from June into July, we started seeing drought conditions really worsen and expand across the whole state, especially from south to north. And this continued all the way into December. So this drought actually started getting worse as we entered into the wet season, our typical water year, beginning October 1st. The drought worsened all the way into December. And one of the key factors for that is, for the state of Utah, 2020 was the driest year on record, and that's dating back all the way to the late 1800s. If we factor in another variable, and that's temperatures, and what we saw with the temperatures and the dryness factor, focusing on Salt Lake City alone, where we have an official climate site, the July to December period was not only the driest on record, but it was also the 4th warmest on record. So this puts a tag on the drought, and that tag is a hot drought. When you have a hot drought, it's actually much worse impact-wise, because there's more evaporative demand on any moisture that you do have in the soils, more evapotranspiration. So the warmer it is during a drought period, the worse the impacts of the drought are. We entered into the wet season. Now we transition when we typically are building snowpack in the mountains, which we did. We got up to about 80% statewide average for snowpack in the mountains this year. That was good, but it was below average. And with the combinations of the dryness that we're talking with the drought, and especially the dryness of the soils, we saw record low soil moisture combined with a below average snowpack. So our water supply, so we get 95% of our water supply from snowmelt runoff and going into storage in our area reservoirs. And our water supply forecast, and this is one of our first impacts that we're noticing right now as a weather impact, a water impact, is that projections forecasts for water supply volumes between April and July are only going to be about 20 to 40% of normal for most major basins across the state, with only the highest basins being about 50% of normal.
So Glenn, it sounds like we're breaking records. We're breaking the records that we don't want to break. We have about 30 seconds left in this segment. I want to squeeze this question in real quick. Can you talk about the trends that the changing climate is leading us to? Is this year going to be an aberration, or is Utah going to see more and more of these exceptional droughts?
Right, and it's a challenge because there's weather variables and there's climate variables. Precipitation and trends in precipitation dating back 100 years over the Southwest, it's very noisy. We go through dry periods, we go through wet periods. If we're talking climate, we need to really just focus on temperatures and the warming climatological temperatures across the Southwest. Since 1970, we've seen about a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature each decade, and that trend is continuing. So I was talking about hot droughts. When we go through dry periods in the future, with warming temperatures continuing, we're going to see more and more hot drought periods, and the impacts associated with hot droughts are worse.
And this is why we need to start having this conversation now, and it's more vital now than ever. All right, you've been hearing from Glenn Merrill, hydrologist for the National Weather Service in Salt Lake City. Glenn, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us tonight.
Absolutely. I wish I had better news.
Thank you. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's extreme drought. Joining our conversation next is Craig Butters, Commissioner for Utah's Department of Agriculture and Food. Craig, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rosie. It's a privilege to be here with you tonight.
Craig, producers in agriculture such as farmers, they face different weather conditions every year. How does this year differ, and how is your department looking at the extreme drought throughout the past several years?
Well, this year, of course, the drought is very extreme, as you described it. And we're coming off a year or a summer where we had very low moisture last year, and the winter hasn't helped us out anymore this past year. And so we're seeing extreme weather conditions. About 90% of the drought is in 90% of the state is in extreme drought. And so that is severely impacting our agricultural producers.
And I think those like myself who have lived in Utah for more than the last 20, 30 years have noticed that the past few years we've really been missing that normal snow and rain like you said. Now, what are you hearing from producers this year? Are they worried? Have they been planning for this drought?
Well, it's pretty hard to plan long-term for a drought, but of course we knew that this was coming. We knew that there were going to be challenges this year. So our different agricultural producers are making adaptations to their operations. A lot of them will be planting fewer crops so that they can concentrate the water that they do have on the crops that they will be growing. And of course, our agricultural producers are going to be making different decisions about grazing their livestock and how and when that will happen. A lot of our livestock producers, our ranchers, will be impacted because they'll have to bring their cattle in off the range sooner and most likely have to find feed for them. And on a year where we're in a severe drought, we're not going to have a lot of feed this year. We may even have to pay for shipping costs to bring commodities in from out of the state and out of the area to feed our cattle.
I almost feel like it's a double whammy with the pandemic and now with this drought. So, Craig, what agricultural products grown in Utah will be impacted the most by the drought, and what does that mean for Utahns?
Well, I think some of the major agricultural commodities that we grow are fruits and vegetables. They require a lot of water, and so they will be severely impacted. But also our alfalfa, which is a major crop for livestock, is going to be impacted. We'll probably see cut back from 3 or 4 crops usually to 1 or 2 crops in many areas. So those are some of the main areas, and we'll probably have large impacts on those areas.
Now, your agency sponsors a water optimization program.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the program and how successful it's been?
Yes, our water optimization was begun in about year 2019, and there was $3 million that was appropriated by the legislature for projects to help ag producers optimize their water use. And it was a very successful program. This last legislative session, there was an appropriation of $3 million more to go towards this program. It's a 50-50 match program, so producers have to contribute 50% to the program. And we saw major savings in water usage with the initial program. Over 28,000 acre feet of water was saved, which comes up to be about 9.1 billion gallons of water that has been saved through the water optimization program. And so our producers are doing a great job of trying to optimize the water that they use.
I'm glad there are resources for them. What other services do you provide to growers that Utahns might be interested in knowing about?
Some of the other programs that we do have an agricultural resource development loan. We call it our ARDL loan, and that is also a low interest loan that has helped to create over 900 different projects in the life of that program. And those projects also help our agricultural producers, our farmers and ranchers, save money. We also have different programs like our grazing improvement program, where funding is used to help those that graze on public lands to create water systems to make it more effective and to use our public lands more efficiently that way.
There are multiple options out there. Now, Craig, looking back and looking to now and then ahead, what concerns you the most about our current drought?
Well, we just hope that we'll get moisture. I mean, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it, but one of the things that concerns me is that on the horizon, we're not seeing any change. We are just very concerned that this is going to severely impact our agricultural producers. We're coming off a pandemic, and a lot of the producers were impacted through the pandemic, and now this is kind of like a double whammy. Our producers are resilient. They'll do whatever it takes to be successful. I'm concerned that a lot of those operations may have to make some very critical decisions that will end their business, actually. And the way of life for our farmers and ranchers is very important to them. It's an important aspect of our state's economy and just the overall spirit of our state. So we want to support our agricultural producers and the great work that they do.
Yeah, very worrisome that this could be the case for a long time coming, but glad to hear that there is resource and support out there for our producers. All right, you've been hearing from Craig Butters, Commissioner for Utah's Department of Agriculture and Food. Craig, thanks for being here tonight and being a part of our conversation.
Thank you so much, my privilege.
We'll be right back. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's extreme drought. Next, we discuss how the drought is going to affect our wildlife and whether fishing and hunting will be limited this year. Rounding out our discussion tonight via Zoom is Faith Jolly with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Faith, thanks for joining us tonight and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Faith, are you seeing any effects of the drought on Utah's wildlife right now?
We are actually more from last year's drought. We have been in a drought for a couple of years. This year's obviously more extreme. But from last summer, we did some surveys at the end of the year. We always do annual surveys to kind of see how our herds are doing. And yeah, we had a lot of, our herds going into the winter had less fat during those surveys, which makes it harder for them to survive winter. And so our populations actually right now are quite a bit lower than they were last year, as a result of some of the drought impacts from last year. And so, this year we expect to see kind of the total damage, I guess you could say, when we do those end of the year surveys as well. So we'll see some of those total numbers and impacts.
And I know there's been sightings of cougars and bears a little bit closer to the city, and I know there's no direct evidence right now, but I know that when we spoke to some of your colleagues, they said that those animals might be searching for water, and so we're seeing those impacts, right, even on the city level. Now, how will the drought affect Utah's deer, elk, or waterfowl hunts? Where do you envision the populations of wildlife, and are you considering fewer permits?
Yeah, so with deer population specifically, drought does lead to a reduced number of fawns that are born and survive. And it does, like I mentioned, reduce our overall population. So we saw that from last year. We'll likely see that going into the next year. And so, our current management plan, we have an objective basically to have a little over 400,000 deer across Utah. And right now we're estimating about 314,000 deer. So because we already know there is a lower population, the Wildlife Board did reduce those permit numbers for our general season already earlier this year. And we have lower permits across 17 of our 29 deer hunting units already. So we have already seen a reduction in our deer permits for this fall.
Wow, that's nearly 25%. Now, how about fishing? Do you expect a lower population of fish due to the drought, and how will you be managing that?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, drought actually impacts fish as well. As you can imagine, less water is not great for fish since they rely heavily on water, like all our wildlife do. But yeah, so we do tend to see some increases in fish die off if the water levels get really low. The water temperature heats up, which leads to less oxygen for our fish species. And so to kind of prevent some of that fish die off, we actually just yesterday increased some fishing daily limits in 10 of our water bodies so that anglers can get out and they can catch and keep more of these fish and utilize them, and so they don't just die and go to waste essentially later this summer as the water levels continue to drop. So we'll continue to kind of reassess that as the summer goes on and make some of those adjustments as needed. We're also decreasing our fish stocking in some of these water bodies that we anticipated will be impacted by low water levels, and then we'll reallocate those fish to different water bodies that we don't feel like will be quite as impacted. So making some adjustments on our stocking and also increasing some of those fish limits as needed.
Yeah, keeping the DWR very busy this year. Now, we're learning that there could be a rise in ticks this year due to the drought. How does that affect other wildlife as well as people who are out recreating in the wilderness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we do, like you said, because ticks survive and they kind of reproduce better in years with low snowpack, we do see higher numbers of ticks in some of our wildlife. And specifically, they impact moose because we'll see like up to 10,000 ticks on one single moose. And, they take a lot of blood from these animals, obviously. And so that decreases a lot of that energy for these moose and kind of takes up their energy to be able to replenish that. And, a lot of times people in the spring, they'll see some moose that look kind of white. And it's because they'll rub off a lot of their hair trying to get rid of these ticks. And so it does really impact our moose. They just spend a lot of energy trying to replace blood and also to kind of get rid of these ticks and rub off their hair. And then that obviously takes away some of their body heat trying to survive the winter. So we really do see a lot of these impacts from ticks during these drought years on our moose populations.
Well, yeah, based on what you described there, I can't even imagine. Faith, what can people do to help wildlife during the drought? Or, if they want to do something about this, what are their options?
Yeah, so as always, we tell people if you see wildlife out in the wilds, please don't approach them. Please don't bother them. It makes them burn up energy trying to get away from people. And, this year, especially because of low food resources, low water resources. They need all the energy reserves that they can, trying to build up that fat to get through this coming winter. So just don't bother them unnecessarily. Don't make them run away. And another thing to consider is if you're out camping, try not to camp right next to a water source, especially if it's the only one in an area, because that might deter wildlife from using that water source. And, water is going to be limited this year, like everyone's mentioned. And so our wildlife really need all those resources they can get.
Great tips there. You've been hearing from Faith Jolly with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Faith, thank you so much for your input tonight. We enjoyed having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on tonight.